Good morning. It's Wednesday morning, July something. I'm not sure what day it is, the 30th, 29th, I think 29th. And it's about 8:09 a.m. here in the beautiful city of Seattle, Washington. Sitting beside the road, my favorite place. Just had a Starbucks egg cheddar sandwich without the cheese and some good coffee and some awesome ice water. I always buy a bottle of water, and then I ask them to fill it full of ice. Now, unfortunately, the water's come over the ice, and that kind of destroys the effect. I like it when the water is about that much under the top of the ice. That way, when it gets cold, it gets really cold. This way, it's better than lukewarm, but it's not quite there. Almost there. The idea is there anyway. And I hope that you have a day that is good and enjoyable. The devotional area that I read this morning was Isaiah chapter 40, one of my favorite. Isaiah is my favorite book of the Old Testament, bar none. I like the Genesis stories, I have to say, a great deal. And of course the Psalms in terms of their reflective temperaments, all the various human emotions, etc. But Isaiah is the one that is most hopeful, that arises out of pre-exile and exilic experience of Israel, anticipating the coming fall in some respects, and in the midst of it in other respects, depending on where you're reading from, but always with a hopefulness that God is acting, and God is acting in human history to restore God's purposes for humanity in all time. That is the essence of what we mean when we say God is loving and sovereign. What we don't mean, by any means, by we, I mean the Christian tradition, what we don't mean in any sense of the word is that we're not fatalists. We don't believe that everything happened because God caused it. God allowed it, maybe in some sense, but the understanding of Christian faith is based on a patient optimism that is rooted in the nature and character of God. It believes that God is deeply involved in God's world, but that God has allowed tremendous freedom, even at great cost to humanity and to God, to the Trinity of God, who, let's face it, before creating beings like us, or perhaps angelic beings who had, particularly humans, who had the capacity for love, which means we also have the capacity for hate, God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, communal in essence, only knew joy and holiness and wholeness and creativity, and it is in the creative spark to create and to be involved in that creation, but also to allow it and gift it to have sufficient room to, if it chooses, destroy itself, to walk alongside and near, but not to overwhelm its choices by the presence of the Almighty. You have hints of that, but it gets very clear in chapter 40. It starts off that says, "Comfort my people. Don't give up. I realize that you have been on the outside of my story and in exile. Comfort Israel. Let them know in the midst of their horror that their sin has been atoned for, that they have been paid double for all their sins. No matter how horrible was your history, it is forgiven, and it is being renewed." And then towards the end of the chapter, there is this question that asks an important question. It says, "Have you forgotten? Why do you complain?" And God uses the familial term, Jacob. "Why are you concerned, Israel, that I have forgotten you?" Later, Isaiah says, "Can I forget you when I've ascribed you on the very palm of my hand?" Tremendous imagery in the whole Isaiah text. But in this particular text, then God reminds Israel that God is sovereign. Who is my equal? Look around at all the idols that the other cultures worship, made of human ingenuity. Can they answer their prayers? No. But who is God's equal, who creates every star, that sees it in the nebula and allows the power of that star to form and contract until it explodes in brilliance? I've named them all. I watched them all. And in modern scientific terms, over the billions and billions of years of my continuing creation, I've been present to each and all. I have not forgotten you. And then there's simply this affirmation that those who look to the Lord, those who trust in the Lord patiently, will renew their strength. Even young men, the text says, will stumble and fall. But those whose hope is in the Lord will renew their strength, and they will mount up like the wings of an eagle in strength and soar. Been reading, because my pastors asked us to, a book called the Patient Firmament of the Church. I've just started, and I've finished, I think, only one chapter so far, but the thesis of the text is that the explosion of the early church in the first 4 centuries, and it was an explosion, so that at the time of Constantine, when he first made the Christian faith legal, and then later the national religion, and that may or may not have been such a great gift, when he did both of those things, they may have grown to be 5% of the population, which is extraordinary in just a few hundred years. But he said what they bring to the table is a patient hope that does not deny the reality of the troubles of the day, but sees, nor does it blame God for them in the sense that God is in, quote, control, but sees God acting in redemptive ways. I made a tweet yesterday where I talked about America is a land that has a historic racial sin at its root, and liberty. And liberty ever expands. And then I simply commented that there is no justice without liberty. Now, in part, I'm talking about pushing back against a cancel culture that I see on both the left and the right. I got a push back from one of my cousins from the right, indicating that to me, and this person has some historic knowledge of our own familial history because his mom spent a great deal of time researching it, and I asked if I could get my hands on some of that research. But he said, don't call us racists. He says our own family history is that we come out of England in the 1600s, and we were bond servants to Chesterfield of Virginia. And then he says on the other side, the Adkins, which was Matson, M-A-T-S-O-N, not M-A-T-T-S-O-N. He says that side was part of one of 6 founding members of the Underground Railroad. So don't call us racist. I pushed back considerably and reminded him that all of Europe participated in a deep, deep racial injustice of slavery that had global effect. Now, only about 5% of all the slaves that came out of Africa came to the United States. It was a global pandemic, if you will, of sin. And it reached to the whole world. And everyone in Europe participated either directly or indirectly by privilege, even bondservants in some respect. And that it was deep, and that we cost us 600,000 lives, the single greatest cost in a war for American history, to find the initial redemption. And that it wasn't until 1964 that African Americans even had the effective right to vote. So there was political disenfranchisement all the way through that. So he says you cannot argue either in terms of prejudice or in terms of the economic system or in terms of the political system that this country's originating sin is not race. And it says, and beyond that, what of the Native Americans? We confiscated their territories, their lands, over 100,000 of their children removed from tribal communities and forced into government schools for the purpose of, quote, Christianizing them, forbidding their own personal faith tradition and religion out of their tribal culture, the speaking of their own languages. In many of those schools, males were not allowed to study academics, only the trades. I mean, it was horrific. And that lasted up until the early 1970s before that was ended. It is hard to argue, whatever our own familial history may be. And I'm grateful if our familial history has some of those who were trying to remedy the issue. That's extraordinary and had its own suffering. That's good in a sense. And that's great, but that shouldn't be used as a form of cancellation. In fact, if it is, that's the highest form of denial. Paul represents the patience of the early church when in Romans 9 through 12, chapters 9 through 12, he wrestles with why the people of Israel aren't inside this incredible story of Yeshua. And he concludes a couple of things. He concludes, first of all, that it was Israel's rejection of the Messiah that led to the salvation of the whole world. Everybody gets inside the story. Secondly, he says that the coming salvation of the whole world through Jesus of Nazareth, when the Gentiles, now think about that, when the Gentiles take hold of it, and it becomes the center of the story for Gentiles throughout the world. This is when there were very, very few Christians. He says that will cause Israel to come home someday as a whole. And then he makes the extraordinary conclusion that I've referenced too often, which he says, God has given all humankind over to disobedience and sin in order that God may have forgiveness. He may renew all of humankind. That is the essence of the Christian hope. Not that God allows everything that happens to happen, or that God controls all that happens. Christians are not fatalists. Quite the opposite. We believe in human freedom guaranteed by God, even in our sinfulness. Great cost to allow humanity to be who it is. Great cost. It will not last forever. Justice will in the end be done. But hopefully everyone by that time will come home. That's the real hope inside the gospel. The all really means all. Every time it's mentioned in the gospel, it's mentioned quite often. So I don't care whether we cancel out the story on the left or the right, or we cancel people out on the left or the right. We diminish what is human on the left or the right. The gospel cancels out no one. Not you. Thank God, not me, though I deserve it. May God bless you this morning. May the hope that is in Jesus Christ, that you are saved, I am saved, the whole world is saved. May we grow up into this hope so that that which is true becomes real in us.
So even though
Blessings.
we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream.
Yes.
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day
Yes.
this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
You are forgiven. The world is forgiven. You are saved. The world is saved. Jesus Christ coming, life, death, passion, resurrection, changed everything. And our call is to open up, to break down the barriers, to open up the gospel so that everyone recognizes they are inside this story.